Yeah. Well, I end the book with what I call an enigma. And when back in the late 60s, I was teaching then at Kansas Wesleyan in Salina, Kansas. Teaching biology, coaching track, but I wanted to live in the country. So I went out to a place along the Smoky Hill River, southernmost drainage of the Missouri River Basin, and I would find myself sitting on a bank overlooking that river and the valley beyond. I approached the family, or the couple, the childless couple that owned the land, and they didn't want to sell. And eventually they agreed to sell us 3 acres, and I was willing to pay them $1,000 an acre. They said, "Oh, that's too much, 500's plenty." And so I bought these 3 acres for $500, and then added more. Eventually we had a total, well, it's actually 30 acres now. They called it 28. But didn't have enough money to really get started building a house. So I'd go out there frequently just to look it over and enjoy the view and so on. Well, I finally started, had a well put in the lines for the power and the water, and rented a tractor, $5 a tractor hour. I had a front end loader on it, and began to dig a walkout basement. I was doing essentially all this work by myself. And I'd get tired, and I'd go over and sit on that spot where I'd sit before I started digging. And the experience that I had before I started being a participant in the creation was now gone. I could never get it back. I'd close my eyes and try to get it back. There was an iron bridge. There was the ripple of the Wellington Shale. There were the trees along the ravine. But that experience of Eden was gone. And so continued to build, eventually put in fruit trees, sandbox for grandchildren, and so on. And I finally concluded that maybe the loss of Eden was a bargain. But its loss came at a cost of ecological capital. I don't know what to do about it, except that it's kind of like sometimes you'll see a photograph of a beautiful young woman and then an older woman in the same image, and you can't see both at the same time. You've seen those kind of things, where there's a lamp on the one hand and a beautiful maiden on the other. There are a lot of those kind of tricks. And I began to understand the problem of those that talked about the dualism, the holy versus the the secular or the profane. So the question becomes: is it possible for us to live in a world that is not profane? I don't know. Except that I think that that's one of those questions that Wendell Berry says that goes beyond the available answers. And it's the kind of question that forces knowledge out of the categories. What I do think is that the myth makers, in wrestling with this problem, especially the myth makers of the Genesis version, in which the Eve is in the garden, the serpent comes, Adam comes, there's the partaking of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and then they're driven from the garden, and the angel with the flaming sword then denies access to the tree of life. So what I'm hoping is that 6 ecologists, 3 men, 3 women, might be able to approach the angel with the flaming sword and have a speech that goes something like this. Too much water's gone through the turbines to give up on the tree of knowledge. But we got to have access to the tree of life. But we will make this commitment that from this time forward we will make the tree of knowledge subordinate to the tree of life. So give us a sign. Well, the tree of life then comes over to become a vine. It starts growing toward the tree. The tree of knowledge comes over and becomes a vine that starts growing toward the tree of life. And now that dualism, going back to the Greeks and the Hebrews and before, has been arrested. And it starts climbing up, but now we've introduced the potential of strangling the tree of life. So what we need is a kind of an ecological priesthood that will tell us when the vine is turning. If we don't have, so what is the tree of life? The tree of life is a tropical rainforest. The tree of life is a prairie. The tree of life is a desert scrub. And the tree of knowledge is where we are breeding perennial grains to be grown in mixtures according to what we understand about that broad discipline of ecology and evolutionary biology. But our standard is the wild. So how do we know when we've gone too far? Then becomes the primary challenge. And I think that we can get more information to increase our imagination about that if we begin with our food supply. So if we start with the idea that we may be able to get through this long tunnel, this long darkness of climate change, reducing population, ending economic growth, learning to live within our means, if we can keep ourselves fed. If we can keep ourselves fed, then we will be able to retain what it is that we picked up during this prodigal journey in which we got Copernicus and Newton and Einstein and an understanding of plate tectonics and an understanding about the heavens and their scale, and that the carbon that entered into our bodies was cooked in the remote past of a dying star, and from it at lower temperatures came nitrogen and oxygen, and these are elements were spewed into space and mixed and formed planets and we ourselves, and that we can keep alive that idea that the ancient seas set the pattern of ions in our blood and the ancient atmospheres molded our metabolism. But we, in order to retain all of that that was gained during this journey of prodigal living and destruction of the capitalist, is going to require building an agriculture based on the kind of ecosystems that shaped us, not the kind of ecosystems that led to the further exploitation. So that's why there's more on the line than some specialty crop to be advanced in a local health food store.